Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to be about making a Windows 10 client operating system template for your KVM lab environment. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as invite everyone, if you enjoy the content of the video, make sure you click like, as well as share with others who might find the content useful. If you have not subscribed yet, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the bell when you do so you can be aware of when new content comes available. So this is in line with a video that I made last week about creating a Windows Server template for your KVM lab environment, except we're going to do the client operating system for this particular video. A lot of the steps are going to be similar, but there are a couple of little particular things I want to show you that are specific to the client operating system that you're not going to see, or rather not going to have to do on the server operating system. One thing to keep in mind is my use of the word template. This is actually going to be a full VM that you would be cloning in your KVM environment. It's not template in the sense that VMware uses, where it's an outline of the configuration for a VM and then you make a new VM from it. This will be a full-fledged VM that we're preparing to be able to clone. So we'll start with our virtual machine manager, and you see that we have the server template from the other video, and I went ahead and made one for Windows 10 Home. That's a particular case that we'll talk about in this video. But once again, we will create a new virtual machine. I'm using my remote KVM connection, and I'll be using a ISO image for the operating system. So I'm going to go ahead and browse to my ISO's volume here and get the image. Remember, your environment might not look the exact same as this. You might just have a default volume to be able to get your image from. I have a separate one for ISOs and a separate one for the actual VM hard drives. So I'll select my Windows 10. I'll start typing Windows for the operating system, choose Windows 10. KVM is going to suggest 4 gigs of RAM and 2 CPUs by default. I will probably stay with this for the client operating system, but of course you can vary this however you wish. But I do remember, this was true for Windows 8, I'm not 100% sure about Windows 10, like you have to have a certain amount of memory to even get through the installer. And I think in Windows 8 that was like 1 gig of RAM. I'm not sure, again, not sure what it is in Windows 10, but if you find yourself in the installer and it complains that you can't go forward, a troubleshooting step would be to add some more RAM. Of course, you can alter that later on once you have the operating system installed. So we'll go ahead and click forward. And it's suggesting 40 gigs. I'll stick with that. However, I'm going to do a custom storage because remember, I keep my hard drives in a different volume, but if you are just using defaults, you can simply create that image. So I'm going to go ahead and make this, we're going to call it demo win10 test. And we'll stick with what KVM had recommended, which is 40 gigs. Probably more than what we need, but this is just for a demonstration. We'll click forward. And again, I like having my virtual machine name be the same as what I have for the actual storage device. Win10 test. Network selection, I'm just going to keep my default network there. And I am going to customize the configuration because I want to use the VirtIO type of disk and VirtIO type of network interface card. And then we'll begin installation. And like with the Windows Server video, I'm not going to sit through the entirety of the installation. I'll skip ahead a bit because I'm sure you watching the video would like to see more than just, all right, so here's the status bar kind of thing. I'll get to where we're at the high points. The installation for Windows 10 Client OS is going to be very similar to the Server OS. So we'll click Next, Install Now. And it'll first ask you if you want to activate Windows. You can continue with the installer without a product key, which I'm going to do for this particular demonstration. But if you have a product key that you're going to use to activate this, or you have your MSDN product key, this is where you would enter that. But I'm going to click, I do not have a product key, just to continue with the demo. And we can select the type of Windows 10 operating system that we want. And for this, we're going to do Pro. In my lab, I tend to have stuff joined to a domain, and I'm fairly sure you have to have Windows 10 Pro for that. I'm not 100% sure though, but it's been forever since I've actually used Windows 10 Home Edition, so I'm not sure anymore. But we'll just go ahead and use Pro for this demonstration. We'll have to accept the license agreement. So we'll click that, click next, and we'll do custom install. And we don't see a disk. And remember, this is because we chose the VirtIO type of disk. So what we need to do is install the VirtIO drivers at this step, which I'm going to go to View and then Details. We're going to change the SATA Cd-Rom ISO to use my VirtIO driver ISO. I'll put a link in the description as to where you can go to get this particular ISO. We'll apply it and click Load Driver. And we'll browse our way through, get to the CD drive here. I'm going to go to VIO Store. We want Windows 10 and AMD 64, because this is a 64-bit operating system. And it should find the Red Hat SCSI controller, and we'll click Next. After a moment or so, it'll find the disk, but it will complain that it can't install, and that's because of the ISO. We obviously don't have a Windows installer attached right now. What you can do is give yourself a second CD-ROM drive when you're first creating the VM and just put the VirtISO on it, but I tend to just keep one and change out the ISO. There's no real wrong way to do this. Now, you might get this every once in a while. It's saying that this is being used by another guest, and it's true because I was using it for the Windows 10 Home. This isn't going to be a problem because we're not writing to this. This is all going to be read-only, so if that comes up, you can click OK through it. If you know that something's going to be read-only, then we'll do refresh, which that will then allow us to continue with the installation process. And so at this point, we'll start the Windows installation. This will be very similar to what you see with Windows Server. And we'll pause the video and come back once we are done with all of the initial reboots and get into the actual configuration of the new operating system. So we've been through some of the initial reboots and we're at the beginning of the configuration process. You might hear my lab server spinning up in the background. For some reason, the fans decided to turn on. So we will choose United States for the region and US keyboard layout. We're not going to add a second keyboard layout. And there is no network connection now because we have the VirtIO NIC. We have to get the drivers installed for that. We'll continue with limited setup. We're going to make our test user. And we'll give it a password. And we have to answer some security questions. So my first pet's name was ASDF, which also happened to be the city that I was born in, as well as my nickname when I was a kid. We'll keep the defaults for the privacy settings. Again, we're just doing an install that is a template, so we're pretty much doing as little configuration as possible to where we have kind of a fresh install to be able to make new VMs from. We're not going to have Cortana help get things done. And now it's going to create our user profile, then we'll be on the desktop. Here we have our desktop. I'm actually going to expand my console window just a bit so we get everything. We're not going to configure Microsoft Edge. And first thing I'm going to do, very similar to what I did with the server configuration, is change the time zone to my current time zone. We'll set this to Eastern. And the time is not going to change automatically yet because we don't have a network connection, so we don't have NTP. Speaking of that, let's go ahead and install the VirtIO drivers. So we'll change our ISO back to VirtIO. Again, my lab server is spinning up, or the fans are rather. So we'll go into here. We're going to install the x64 drivers. We'll go ahead and grab all of the drivers. We'll click Yes for user access control. Now I'm going to go ahead and trust software from Red Hat for this demonstration. If you're making your image for production, you might not want to do this. You might want to pick and choose exactly what you trust, but for this install, I'm just going to go ahead and have it trust everything from Red Hat. There we see that our NIC is functioning now. So we'll click Finish. We also want to install the guest agent so that way you can interact with the VM more with Virsh. Go into the guest agent folder and we'll do the x86-64. All right, so the only other configuration we're really going to do is work with patching up the system and then do a couple of things with user accounts. So we're going to start with patching the system. I'll just do that through the GUI. Scroll down to Updates and Security. One thing that I do change under the advanced options is go ahead and receive updates for other Microsoft products when you get Windows. Everything else will just keep as the defaults. And it's going to download all of the patches. I am going to go ahead and download the optional update here because I want a fully patched system before we sysprep everything down. This is going to have a couple of iterations just like on Windows Server. When I was testing this a little bit earlier, I think I had 3 waves of Windows updates to do. So what I'm going to do is pause the video and return once all of the Windows updates have finished downloading and installing and all of the restarts are done. After a few rounds of patches and reboots, we are now completely patched with our Windows 10 system. So the next step is going to be running Sysprep. Now, before we do this, I'm actually going to take a snapshot of this VM, and the reason being there's a particular gotcha that we're going to encounter, and having a snapshot will allow me to go back to this point easily, and so I can show you the way that we're going to get around this particular gotcha. All right, so that's been made. We'll go back to our console, and just like with Windows Server, we're going to run the Sysprep Utility, run PowerShell as an administrator. That'll put us into the System32 folder, so we can just go ahead and change directory into the Sysprep folder. And we'll run Sysprep generalize OOBE for out-of-box experience. We're going to shut this down and use the mode VM. So this will take a couple of minutes, and once the VM is shut down, we'll go ahead and clone it like we would for real use in our lab, and I'll show you the particular gotcha that's going to come up. So Sysprep has finished. We've shut down the VM, and the next step I usually do is clear the Cd-Rom tray before I do my clone. And so in a normal situation, we now have our VM, and we would clone this. So just simply right-click the VM and clone. And we're just going to keep the defaults here. Again, if you want to change storage location and change the name of this, you can do that. So we'll clone this. This will take a couple of minutes, and then once it's cloned, we'll fire it up and go through the process of how we would treat a newly cloned machine. And I will show you the gotcha that I've been alluding to the last couple of minutes. So we see our clone, the demo Win 10 test clone. So we'll go ahead and run this and open up the console. And since this is configured for the out-of-box experience via Sysprep, it'll take a couple of minutes to go through some of the initial tasks for what would be a fresh install of Windows, except of course we've patched everything and we set the date time. So once we get to the part where we're configuring users, we'll pick back up. So as before, we'll choose the setup for an organization and domain join. And we're going to make our test user. Now, often in my lab environment, I will have a local administrator account on my VMs just in case something happens with the domain and I can't use domain admin credentials. So let's say that we wanted that to also be test user. And what we're going to find is it's going to complain about the username because when Sysprep happened, it still kept the test user account. And so therefore, if you were to do the out-of-box experience, each time you're going to need to give it a new username to be able to make the initial account for the client OS. So the way that we handle this is by getting rid of the test user that we have created. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to go ahead and just force off this particular VM. And I'm going to go back to the original demo Win 10 test, which is from where we made our clone. We'll open this, and I'm going to revert that snapshot. So if you remember, this snapshot was taken right after we completely finished patching, but before we ran the Sysprep commands. So in just a moment, this will be applied. And we go back to our graphical console, and here we are in that same state as before, and it'll take just a minute or so for the time to sync up. So the other step that I do to prevent this issue of the username not being available, which again is not really a problem. This is running as designed, but for me, like I said, I try to do that local administrator account, and I want the name to be consistent. So what I'm going to do is go into computer management, and there's a couple of ways of doing this, but choosing the GUI way since we're in the client operating system. We're going to go to local users and groups and go into the users folder, and we are going to enable the administrator account. And in addition, we're going to set it a password. Probably don't have to do this for this step, but it's a good practice to always give this account a password. We're going to go back and remove the test user account, which we could have done from there, but I wanted to show you how this looks from the official Windows 10 settings screen. So we'll go into accounts, then family and other users. Oh, wait, I made a mistake. We actually need to sign in as the administrator account to do what I want us to do. So let's sign out. We'll sign back in again, this time as the administrator. It'll take a couple of minutes to sign in because it needs to create a new user profile for the administrator account. And just as with the test user account, we have to select some of the privacy settings, and we're here on the desktop. So now we'll go into settings and accounts. We'll click other users, and we are going to remove this test user account. We're going to delete the data as well. This is going to remove the user profile for test user. And what will happen once we do this and we do Sysprep, just like with Windows Server, the administrator account is effectively going to be reset, and we're not going to have the test user already there. And so therefore it won't be an issue when we create the account. So case in point, we'll go back to Sysprep. See Windows System 32 Sysprep. We'll run the Sysprep command with generalize out of box experience, shut down, if I spell that correctly, and mode VM. So I'm going to complete this process and then make a clone of this, and then we'll look at the difference in behavior when we create the new user account. So I've created the clone demo win10 test clone 1. This is from the newly Sysprepped machine where we got rid of the test user account. And so if I were to make my next user, test user, and we see that it's not going to complain about the user account anymore because we don't have a conflict in naming. So the last thing that I wanted to show you was how this is going to work with your Windows 10 Home version. So let me go to that VM here. And this I have not patched, simply because we're just testing this one particular thing. But in order to get around this particular gotcha, we need to get rid of the current user account and enable the administrator account. Well, if I were to try to follow these same steps for the Windows 10 Home Edition, go to Computer Management, we're going to find that there is no area for local users. And so therefore, through the GUI, there's not going to be a way to enable the administrator account. Now, you might think it is simply there is no administrator account. That is not correct. Just like a Linux system, there's going to be a root account somewhere. So to be able to enable the administrator account, we're actually going to use PowerShell. You can do this with the original command line as well, but as you know, I like using PowerShell when I can with a Windows system. So I run PowerShell as an administrator. We're going to use the following commandlet here just to get the current local users. So we'll use get local user. And of the local users, we're going to find the administrator exists. And there's also our test user. So we're going to enable local user, name administrator. We can do get local user again, and you'll see that the administrator is now enabled. And if we want to set a password, we'll do set local user, name administrator. And then for password, we actually have to give this a secure string. We can't just put plain text in here. So an easy way to do that is to do a open parentheses and then do read host as secure string and close the parentheses. And this is going to take us to a prompt where whatever we put into this is going to be fed into read host, which will be fed into the password. So let me put in my password here. Notice how it stars on the screen because it's a secure string. So we've enabled the administrator user, we have set its password, and so we should be able to log in as the administrator. So let me sign out. And there's the administrator account. And at this point, we could sign in and do the same steps before as removing the test user and then running the Sysprep to be able to prepare the VM for eventual cloning. So I hope you found this video to be useful. It's very similar to the one that I did with Windows Server, but there are a couple special things for the client OS that you would want to do in particular if you do like what I do and always create a local user for each of the new clones, and I want that local user to have the same username and such. We have to do these couple of extra steps to be able to make that happen. As always, if you enjoyed the content of the video, make sure that you click like and share with others. If you have any questions or critique, feel free to leave comments on this video. I'll address those as I have both time and ability to do so. I want to again thank returning subscribers for watching another video and invite you, if you haven't subscribed yet, to click that subscribe button or follow button depending on the platform that you're watching this on, and ring the notification bell if that's available to you so you can be aware of when new content comes available. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.